And then I realized I don't think I pulled up my agenda yet, so let me go ahead and do that. All right, so we have a busy agenda for today. So I just want to go over what we plan to cover, and then we can move into the presentation. But we'll go ahead and do a welcome. And let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where I'm looking on my screen. I apologize for that. We'll go ahead. Okay, well, I don't know where everybody went. So Gretchen, if you can help me, there we go. If you can help me, let me know if anybody needs to say something that I don't see. That would be really helpful, because I'm going to be looking back and forth at a lot of different places.
Okay.
So today, I don't think we need to do attendance. I think I have a list of everybody. Have you caught everybody as they've come in, Gretchen?
I have, yeah.
Okay. So for those of you that were here last meeting, we did introductions really briefly, but I do want to point out a couple of folks that are joining us that were not here last month, and that was my fault. The first one is Chuck Proctor, and he's the planning manager for our VDOT construction district, and he's been really helping us facilitate the smart scale project development. Is there anything you want to add, Chuck, to that?
No, I just look forward to hearing the discussions, and hopefully we can come to some conclusions so we can move this project forward.
And then we also have Shane Sawyer with us today, also from VDOT, but he's from the central office. And Shane, is it accurate to say that from VDOT's perspective, you have been acting as the project manager as far as facilitating the feasibility study that has brought us to this point?
That would be mostly Chuck that handles that.
Okay. Well, Shane knows lots of things at VDOT too, so.
And I'm
welcome.
also an Albemarle County resident.
Sure. Okay. And then Chris, I don't think you were here at the last meeting, but Chris is the planning or parks planner for the city of Charlottesville. Anything you want to add, Chris?
Nope, the Parks and Greenway Trails planner, and excited to see this joint city-county type of project go forward on a major project like this.
Yeah. So a couple of things I just want to start with before we get to the discussion is that I think it will be helpful to share a little bit of project background, just to help you all understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what the considerations need to be as far as developing an application that's going to be competitive. Before I get into the agenda topics, just based on some of the communication that has been gone around, I wanted to clarify just a couple of things at the outset, and we can discuss this in more detail at the end of the meeting as well if there are additional questions. But I want to make sure that it's clear that we didn't just pick this project to move forward with because we thought it would be a good idea, but this has been part of a pretty comprehensive planning process that has led us to this point. Unfortunately, I haven't been with the PDC for the whole length of how this project has developed to where we are right now. So I won't have a lot of specific information, but I can tell you that there is very strong historical documentation that a desire and a need for a network connection between in this general area between Pan Thompson, Woolen Mills has repeatedly come up in multiple planning efforts. So, so you'll find that in a lot of different planning documents, including the 2019 Jefferson Area Bike and Pedestrian Plan that the PDC developed a couple years ago. So we started with this comprehensive planning process that looked at what the network gaps were and where the needs were. And this has been identified as a high priority need to make that network connection. So once we identified that as a need, what we did was we moved forward and said, this is a high priority need. We're hearing this come up over and over again. Let's go ahead and request funding from VDOT to study how this could potentially be feasible. What are viable options to move this, to establish a pedestrian bridge in this general area. And again, it's not that we weren't aware that there were other potential crossing options that were desirable. We also documented that there was a need, and we continue to have discussions about how there's a desire for potentially a bridge crossing between Dart and Tau and Penn Park, but that was a lower priority compared to this particular bridge crossing. So that's why this bridge crossing was the one that was studied. So we went ahead and did the feasibility study to determine if a bridge were to move forward, what are some viable options? So that was part of the feasibility study that was completed last year. And so now we're really looking at how do we move from the planning and the identification of the need to determining what's potentially feasible to now looking at what makes the most sense as far as pursuing implementation. So it's been part of a project pipeline that started with planning and looking at the area more generally and getting to the point where we're now considering how to request funding for a specific project. Anything else you'd want to add to that, Chuck?
No, I think you covered it for the most part. Like I said, I know this was actually the PDC did an ecological study back in 2015 or 14, and this was one of the locations that they were looking at as an alternative for bike and pedestrians across from the 250, basically to support the 250 corridor as an alternative location. So that's why that was one of the ones, and it was a recommendation out of that study. So
Okay.
Just a point of reference.
All right, and then the other piece of background information that I wanted to make sure that we were all keeping on our radar is the actual process that we're pursuing to potentially implement this project, and that's through Smart Scale. So every 2 years, VDOT accepts applications for these Smart Scale projects, which basically are competitive projects. So we don't have a funding source already in place that we can just decide how to spend, and this project is what we're spending it on. We have to prepare an application for this project specifically, or any project specifically, and then that project is scored and evaluated, and it is ranked against other projects that are also submitted as part of this application process. So so basically this is a summary of what VDOT is going to be looking at when they evaluate how competitive our project is. So the project is going to get a score based on these criteria, and VDOT has an evaluation methodology that they use to determine what the benefits are using this criteria. I'm not going to go into that. I don't think that that necessarily is really important what the specific methodology is, as much as you understand that this is the general process that they go through. And so then what happens is that you have a benefit score, and then that is divided by the project cost. And basically what happens for the most part is that projects with the highest scores, so the highest benefits compared to cost, are projects that will be funded. For this particular project, Shane and Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, or John, I saw John joined as well. But for this particular project, we will be competing for state funding, correct? The statewide funding?
Yes, that is correct. The
Yeah.
MPO can only submit for high priority funding.
Yeah, so we're going to be competing against projects throughout the entire state. So one of the goals of this project is that we want to create an application that is going to maximize the benefits based on the criteria that VDOT is considering. And then we also want to have a lot of awareness that we need to try to keep the project costs as low as possible in order to make our application funded. So what that means is that we really need to focus on how can we facilitate a network connection across the bridge or across the river, making sure that we're considering that we're not going to be able to do everything at one time, because in order to make our project competitive, to get a bridge developed in this vicinity, we're going to have to look at it as a very small incremental step to implementing a larger transportation network. But we're going to have to think of it as it's going to be a series of incremental steps, and it's not something that we're going to be able to necessarily build all at one time. Are there any questions on that before we move forward with the discussion?
Yeah, Sandy, I've got a follow-up question.
Yeah.
This is Tim Padalino with the county. Just in terms of how that plays out, in terms of limiting the project scope or making sure it's, cleverly planned to be phased and incremental, do we know how that actually translates to like project limits or scope yet? Or is that something this committee helps, kind of talk about and speak into? Or and I'm curious if the connections that would be get the bridge back to public right of ways on either side of the river, would those be potentially left out, or would those always be a part of this proposal?
We, at a minimum for this to move forward, we're going to have logical termini based on VDOT's definition of what those are. So at a minimum, these are going to need to connect to transportation systems that meet VDOT's standards. So for example, there's going to have to be a shared use path or some sort of connection that meets VDOT's transportation requirements from the on the Pantop side to their road network. That's going to have to be part of it. As far as what happens on the west side, I think probably we can have some discussions about what facilitating a connection looks like, but we really need to have a really strong understanding that if we want this bridge to be competitive for funding, the opportunity might be, let's get this bridge built at this point and then think about how that can facilitate future network connections, but also how it might make more sense for those to be phased in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Okay. Anything else you all want to add from the VDOT side on that?
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Dee.
Yes, I'm sorry. So, I mean, we've gone through smart scale project scoring before, and it is very competitive, and any monies that the county or the city can add to this, then that definitely helps. But as I'm looking at the scoring, the criteria, I'm not seeing how, if it's a pedestrian bridge or a bicycle bridge, how that's going to enhance connectivity. Reduce, I mean, look at all the criteria as far as safety and everything. I mean, it's not connecting to anything. Someone's not going to go across a bridge, get in a car, go to work, then come back, cross a bridge and, walk to work. I mean, I see that Jessica Bollering is saying, yes, it is, but maybe an explanation, that would be great. Because I'm not understanding it, that I know how competitive these can be, and I'm not seeing where they join into the VDOT when you say they have to meet VDOT standards. As far as I'm assuming you mean roads where cars drive on.
VDOT has standards for pedestrian and bicycle access as well. So for example,
Okay.
VDOT has a standard for what is required for a shared use path to be considered part of their transportation system. But for the other questions, I'll let Chuck or our other VDOT attendees respond in more detail to that question.
Okay.
Yeah, I can
Thank you.
respond to that. This is Chuck Proctor. We look at what vehicles it's going to take off the network. And by looking at that, we look at its effect on congestion. Like if people are going to ride their bike and use this facility instead of driving their car on 250, we'll basically take those vehicle trips off 250 and look at that reduction in congestion on 250. Same with safety. Basically, there's not a good place to cross the river from a safety perspective for bicycles or pedestrians. So this will provide a more safe location for them and encourage more people to do that. So that being said, we will look at diversion of traffic of walking trips off of those other facilities to this location. Now, granted, it's outside of the walk shed for most people because it's I mean, if you're talking about, you live north on 20 and you're going to into the city, this is way out of the way for a walking trip, but it could be incorporated with transit too. So, I mean, just because we're gonna put in this facility, we're gonna look at what its effect is on the transportation network as a whole versus, and how it will reduce the congestion and safety on those other areas.
Right. And I thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. I also know that the main employers are UVA, the county, and, you know, school system. And I'm not seeing where on the other side of Pantops, on the other side where it connects, that being a location that is that close to everything, but maybe. Yeah, so I mean, I'm just trying. I want this to work. I think we need it. I want it to work. Okay.
I mean, hey, John, you want to add anything to that? I mean, you're one of the people that helps score that part of these kind of projects.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Is my camera on here? Yeah, I do think this score project has the opportunity to score really well on economic development too. I think there's a lot of growth in Pantops. Doing yard work.
Yep.
And I don't know what stage that's in, but that's a potential lot of square footage probably under development there that possibly could be used. Additionally, this project will get a land use score. And again, depending on everything going on in Pantops, that could be a really good boost for it. And then same for accessibility. I mean, when you're making a bridge crossing a river, that you're going to get a higher accessibility score than most anything else because you're providing a new connection. So I do think this project has a chance to score reasonably well. From my perspective, I mean, I would just say the risk is always cost, right? And I don't know if it's, you know, there has to be a logical termini. And if you can't do the trail up to the top, then, I mean, I don't know, you know, that's the biggest question mark in my mind is I hadn't seen the cost and I hadn't, you know, seen the separate cost for the trail to connect in. I know there's like a hiking trail below it, maybe you could connect into easier, but I'm not sure if that would pass the smell test. We got to look at that.
And
It would not be up to VDOT regulations at this time.
Can we
That
assume,
wouldn't be, but hey, John, when we looked at this scope, we had always scoped a shared use path that extended from the east end of the bridge all the way up to South Pantops. And
Yeah,
then
that
the west side would be terminated at those, both Chesapeake for that one and the Woolen Mills property for the other one. So those had logical termini on both ends. And the
Okay,
costs reflect that. But if you want to go beyond those locations with connections, none of that would be factored in.
Yeah, I mean, the street I'm seeing at this like kind of northeast corner of the State Farm Operations Center where it stops would be totally fine, I think.
Annie,
they-
do you want to? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Annie's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm looking at the smart scale project scoring under congestion mitigation, how the project addresses the ability of the transportation system to move people and reduce traffic delay. This is still a big question in my mind. And it doesn't seem to me that I haven't seen anything that establishes that there is an unmet need now for people to walk and bike across this river. I think that, you know, it's been talked about as a commuter transportation bridge, but I really cannot believe that there's going to be many commuters that actually use this. I would imagine that it's going to be mostly of recreational use. There have been plans, yes, for a long time. There have been planning documents that talked about a vehicle bridge. And so we backed off of that. But this is not, but we can't talk about this in the same terms as relieving the traffic congestion. I don't believe. And I think that that we don't have enough data here. I mean, where is the data that says that people are going to actually use this bridge to get from downtown Charlottesville to Pantops for jobs? We don't have that data, and I don't understand why it isn't there. Are you planning on doing that?
Do you, John or Chuck, think you might be in the best position to at least address how we would do that, but
I'll address part of it.
okay.
See the second measure, congestion mitigation. A project, and I think there's some points that we could address what you just said, but just as an aside, a project does not have to score on every category to get funded. There's plenty of projects that only score on 1 or 2 or 3. And so, it's better it's more competitive if you can score on all of them. But a lot of times what happens is these are done, I don't know. The top scoring project gets 100% of that score. And so the next projects may get very little congestion mitigation. For example, one year, Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel was the highest scoring congestion project. And so all the other projects scored very low in congestion mitigation. So they had to be getting scores from the other categories. In terms of whether people are going to use the bridge and why they're going to use it, I think it's reasonable to assume that they would use it for both recreation and for other utilitarian trips. I think
A reasonable assumption isn't data. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money, $12 or $15 million. Don't we need some actual data on which to base this decision?
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but won't that be part of the methodology that is used to evaluate the smart scale projects at a minimum?
The methodology?
For the environmental quality isn't part of the score based on the projected use, or am I incorrect on that?
Yes, the congestion mitigation, we would estimate person throughput across the bridge for congestion mitigation. For environmental quality, they estimate, impact to wetlands and some other things. But in terms of why bike ped projects are picked or selected, I mean, the goal generally is to have a connected bike ped network so that you can safely travel anywhere you need to go in an urban area safely on foot or bike. And I would just argue that why it was included in those other plans was for that reason, because there's, Free Bridge is not a, not a conducive environment for walking or biking across the Rivanna. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no bridge on either side for many, many, many miles.
This is Chris. Do you think, to Annie's point, if we gathered, for example, the woman in our office that does outdoor recreation planning lives behind Rose's in the Riverbend apartments and works right here on the downtown mall. Now, is it worth somehow getting some public input, like asking someone like that, would you ride your bike because it would save you all that driving? And for someone like her, it could be a daily thing. Is there time to gather that data that would make it helpful to add to our score sheets?
It's not that it would affect the score. We're going to do the calculation based on the math. There are tools And as part of the evaluation that they will do, you can use streetlight data to establish polygons and determine how many people may use a facility that's new based on the distance that they're having to travel, but they're going to be taking that trip off of the network somewhere else. So it's basically going to say the people are going this way now, and the people will go this way in the future, based on the demand for that facility to be there. If you don't build a facility, you're not going to get the utility of it. Right now, you don't have this utility at all. So I wouldn't discount it as something that we don't need to do, just because we don't necessarily have all the data to support it. At least that's my perspective. I just saw a presentation today where we use that data as a way to determine how much volume we may get on a facility that's like this. So, I mean, there are ways to do it. No, we have not done it at this time, but we will have to do it at some point to do the evaluation.
And Kareem's hand is up. So I want, just because we have a lot that we need to cover, and we're already not going to get through everything today. So we're going to have to continue some of this discussion, but I want you to know that I am taking notes, and we'll make sure that, we don't lose sight that these are concerns that need to be addressed. But Kareem, do you have a comment or a question?
Sure. I was just going to say, I think, in my opinion, whatever we call this bridge, we need, commuter or otherwise, there's a very big lack of a bridge for pedestrian safety access to the other side of Rivanna River. So, I think that would be a big thing and a big win to have that bridge. And I had a question on, what about like commuter traffic for recreation purposes? What if somebody on the Albemarle County side wanted to go to Riverview Park? Could that count with the congestion mitigation?
I don't know that the use necessarily is dependent upon why people are traveling, but I can let our VDOT folks confirm or.
Yeah. And I guess just to give all my comments right now really quickly, it would be helpful. I think you mentioned all the development happening in Pantops. If there was a little diagram for all of us to look at to see what, that potential for people to want to cross to the other side is, and what they would be going for.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sandy, am I mute?
Nope, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I think one of the issues is routing. I mean, I think that those, that it's a big difference to some of us what the route is. And I don't know what order we should do this in, but I think that matters.
Yeah, we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later today. So sounds like if there are no other, does anybody else have any questions about the Smart Scale project scoring or review process? And then we can move forward with some of the other items that I know we need to talk about.
A quick follow-up. Wouldn't we be entitled, for purposes of what this bridge does, to assume that State Farm is fully occupied?
No, this project is not dependent upon the particular utilization of State Farm necessarily. This is, I don't know, Tim, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this, but one of the reasons we're looking at that site is the county owns some property where the bridge landings are. So that's why we're utilizing that site. Yeah. Anything you want to add, Tim?
Not in direct response to that, no.
Okay.
Other than that's one of the county's primary redevelopment opportunities. 30 some acres in the development area. It's a massive opportunity.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move forward, because I know, just as a refresher, this map is not intended, this is very approximate, but just as a reminder, those are currently the three options that are on the table. And also, just so it's clear, we want to make sure that you all know that these have been vetted through a feasibility study. So if you have questions about why other alignments weren't necessarily considered. We can certainly answer those, but really I want to make sure that the decision we really have available in order to move this project forward is really choosing one of these alignments at this point. So we can look at some modifications that are really minor in nature, for example, but primarily we're really going to be deciding whether or not we have a recommendation that we would like to move forward with this committee between the alignments that are already have already been developed. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as well.
So the map shows East Market Street where Broad Street is, but other than that, down the left. Okay. Not a
Yeah,
perfect-
well, that
not a perfect
might
world. It's not a
that
perfect
might
world.
resolve some of my confusion at trying to figure out how we're making a connection to Broad Street.
Right,
So,
there it is. It's,
Yeah, very good.
thank you.
All right, so this is just a reminder. We're going to start talking about some of the factors, and I know there are a couple of things that have come up that are that are really important to make sure that we address. So we'll start with those. I'd like to maybe spend about 10 or 15 minutes going through having discussions about these. I really want to do my best to end at 5 and just know that we can continue this discussion and we can come back and discuss any outstanding concerns if we need to. So the first thing I want to talk about is the parking concerns, specifically around Riverview Park. I've been getting the emails and I appreciate you all making sure that that you're letting me know ahead of time. The parking shortage at Riverview Park currently exists. So there is some question about whether or not this bridge would relieve some of the demand for parking at Riverview Park or potentially increase it if people see the bridge in itself as an attraction. However, I think it's pretty safe to say that commuter use of the bridge wouldn't increase parking demand. So it could be that there is some additional demand on parking related to the recreational use. And some of that could potentially be mitigated if we are making a parking option in Pantops the main parking area where people from outside of the area could travel in order to access the Old Mills Trail as it's expanded and potentially access Riverview Park over that bridge. So that's one thing that I want to mention is that we are exploring what improving the parking would look like on both sides of where this bridge would be to make sure that if there is increased interest, especially since the Old Mills Trail would likely be where there is maybe some additional interest in recreation for a combination of reasons, not just the bridge, but the extension of the trail itself, that that we are making sure that we're providing those opportunities where there's the least amount of congestion and impact on the neighborhood communities. There's really not a lot of additional parking opportunities at the Woolen Mill site. There are 10 dedicated parking spaces for the recreational users, but there's not a very clear opportunity to necessarily expand near Woolen Mills. But there are a couple of opportunities that we could look at within the Riverview Park area. So one of them is right off the end of Chesapeake. There's a former.
Yeah, I don't want to challenge you, but there's tens of hundreds of parking spaces at the wool factory. And there's a sewage treatment plant adjacent to that. The parking is almost unlimited there. And I don't see how you characterize, have you talked to Mr. Roy to see whether parking is available? That's as big a parking lot as Kmart's. So I think we got to make sure we have good facts here before we move forward. I think there's just untold parking adjacent to what would be the Broadway entrance to this bridge. So that's my thoughts.
Do you have any information on that to add, Tim?
Well, there are 10 spaces that are currently reserved for public use. That was part of the county's performance agreement with Mr. Roy and Woolen Mills. So it's not unlimited. Mr. Roy has indicated he's not going to go out there and police and see which car is associated with which tenant, or if people are just parking down there to use, access to the trails or whatever. But there are 10 exclusive public use parking spaces. Those are located in the far western side of Woolen Mills. adjacent to the RWSA property. And those were cited there because of the proximity to that new bike ped bridge across Morse Creek.
Perfect. So we should explore, I think, with Mr. Roy, whether there's some more parking available and whether the sewage plant has any more available parking. But, I would say that 10 parking spaces there is 10 more than are available at Riverside Park.
Sure. So we can certainly add, a conversation with them just to
Thank
see what that opportunity is. But currently, that opportunity doesn't exist that we're aware of. So we can follow up and see if we can get better information there.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Kareem.
I was just gonna ask about, is there a potential bus loop that's gonna go to the Woolen Mills area? I'm just not aware. So if anybody has an update on that stuff,
There is
how's this tying into?
There is a bus. The bus goes down Market Street and up Chesapeake on a regular run. The city bus does. I don't know where it does with respect to Broadway.
Yeah, the one I'm looking at, the Route 1 goes up to, through the Riverside area,
Yes.
Riverside, Riverview Park, right? Yeah.
But there are some I'm sorry, was there another comment?
Yes, this is Annie. So when the pumping station was removed, there was a lot of discussion. Chris, you'll probably remember this, about the use of that space. And at that time, we were assured that it would not be turned into a parking lot. And so that has been, we haven't pressed for what was going to happen to that site, but it has been our understanding that the parking was not, that was not going to become a parking lot. So just want to point that out.
Well,
Could I ask a question? Because I'm not understanding something.
sure, go ahead.
I know of 2 parking areas, and I'm not sure which you refer to. One is down low, where I think the terminus would be, right outside the wool factory. The other is up higher and much larger, which is near the sewage treatment. I thought we were talking about the one down lower near the wool factory, where 10 spots may have been allocated. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
No, the 10 spaces are up near the sewage treatment plant, if I understand what was just said.
No. That's the point, I think. The 10 spaces are down below, near where you go for the factory, according to Sandy. Now, I agree with you.
Maybe we're using different definitions of. Let's see if I can find another map that might show the entire area here. That one's not that great either, is it? So the 2 places that we're talking about potential parking, there's the Woolen Mills area, and I believe, if I'm correct, the parking area is kind of over on this side. Is that correct?
It's right in here.
It's even further west than that, Sandy, but that's generally correct.
Okay, so right in that area is where the designated parking is at the Woolen Mills site. So this would be approximately where that landing would be. And then the other place that we're talking about, so this is what we're saying is right now there are 10 designated spots that could potentially be served by this bridge landing that are also used to access the Rivanna Trail. And then what we're talking about is what some of the opportunities might be for improving parking in the park area if there was an additional parking need that we saw in response to just the general use of the park, but also that could be potentially considered as part of the development of the bridge if it goes more into this general area. Does that answer your question, Dick?
Yes, I just was trying to be sure that what Fran was raising was different for the Woolen Mills terminus but up there near where the sewage treatment is, where there's a large parking area. And I thought that was excluded from our consideration. And we were only talking about near the Woolen Mills, the bit just as you go under the railway and before you get to the Woolen factory, the wool factory, where you get coffee and food.
Just anecdotally, where you get coffee, parking spaces are full all the time. And I think the 10 spaces are up there near the sewage plant. So we just need to get clear on that.
We can certainly clarify that. But in addition to what potentially could be, and it sounds like there might need to be some more discussions around that. If there was a bridge landing over here, potentially we could incorporate some additional parking as part of the design, but it sounds like maybe we need to go back and have some more conversations about that. The other thing that is potentially an option, and again, it's just something that can be explored at this point. We don't necessarily have any commitments or know the feasibility of this, but the state is in the process of acquiring the railroad. And so there's also a parcel of land that is vacant right here that we could potentially have some discussions with to determine if there could be some parking availability there in that location as well. And then if there is, the other thing, and I realize that this might not be the most favorable solution. We could also look at, though, if this really does become a really significant concern and has a lot of negative impact on the neighboring residential property. We could also look at what some options for parking restrictions might be to limit parking along the street for the use of the park. So again, that would have impacts on the current residents, but I do want to make sure that that you all are aware that we do understand that there is a concern about parking, and we are looking at what some alternative options might be where that can be mitigated as part of this project. So any questions or any other questions or
So I have a
thoughts?
question.
Sure.
I was wondering how many parking spaces you feel like you need?
I think that's something that we would need to continue to evaluate. So there are some ways that we could do that. Chuck had talked about using some like data availability and things like that. So there are some techniques that we could use for that. And I think a lot of the discussion also depends on what our opportunities for parking are on the Pantop side as well. But do any of you parks people or VDOT folks have anything else to add related to the need for additional parking?
Chris, I
Me,
would
that-
just say we're already aware of the pressures on Riverview Park and exploring opportunities for that in general. I think for this bridge project, I see some of the chat on the side there. There is a lot of anxiety about how much parking an amenity is going to bring. I've built about 4 pedestrian bridges in my career. They haven't changed the parking situation, but this is different. It's down by the river. A lot of people like to be there. With the State Farm piece, we might find this actually helps reduce some of the parking need on the city side. So I think when we discuss this, that making sure we know there are some options to pursue in case this becomes an issue without overlooking the fact that it could become an issue, I'm pretty comfortable with it on a parks planning level. Other than that, we've already got a parking issue at Riverview, and we are struggling with how to make better access to parking for the river all along the city and without paving the entire riverfront. So that's been an issue we've been talking about before this bridge ever came up. My hope again is that with more people maybe coming across from the State Farm side, we might actually see a minor reduction in parking on the flip side, but we need to be prepared to explore this. And I'm the one that mentioned the railroad one. If the state bought the railroad, we might be able to look at that lot over there in a different way. But again, all of this requires some neighbor discussion, some public input. We're not just going to say, here's a parking lot and pave it without having more public input on that particular thing.
I have one more question. This is supposed to be for commuters. They would park at Riverview Park. Are they trying to get to the hospital to go to work? Where are they going?
Well, this bridge would really be it would really be serving multiple purposes. So it would be facilitating a commuter a commuter route between, between the Pantops and Woolen Mills area. I think there is some question about, because you are correct that there are pretty limited recreational attractions on the other side in the Pantops area. The exception being that there is the Old Mills Trail. So I think the question right now is that, as the Old Mills Trail is currently, my understanding is that it's pretty rugged and it's not likely to necessarily attract a lot of recreational users that would be driving to Riverview Park to cross the bridge specifically to go onto Old Mills Trail. But if the trail is more accessible from different locations, and if the extension is made going south, that could provide a little bit more attraction for people that want to come to the area to use it recreationally. But again, I think if that's who is coming to the area to use this for recreational purposes, we do have the opportunity to also look at how we can accommodate some of the parking on the Pantop side to reduce the stress on the Charlottesville Riverview Park side. Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and I would like to add to that, just as with roads, trails aren't built just for commuting. Commuting actually makes up less trips than your other activities, such as running errands and just going about your daily business. So again, our roads aren't only used to get to and from work, nor should a trail be used just to get to and from work.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Just in response to your query about whether there's any more comments about parking, I just want to emphasize the county understands the importance of increasing parking and increasing all kinds of access to the river, to the greenway system in general, to parks. And this has been identified in the Pantops master plan that was finalized in 2019. That sort of objective is all throughout the Rivanna River Corridor Plan that's kind of in the process of being adopted right now. So I just want to emphasize that we hear and understand the importance of increasing access to the parks and the trails along the river, including accommodating more vehicular access, as well as other modes of travel. And that I do think there are potential opportunities on the Pantop side to alleviate pressure at Riverview Park, like Chris was saying, and just to otherwise, increase access. I think it's really important that we do that in a vehicular and a non-vehicular way. I do need to excuse myself, but I wanted to add that just from the county's perspective, the parking thing is on our radar, and I consider increasing access one of our top priorities right now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tim. We are getting a little, go ahead, Gabe.
Hi, I'm Gabe. I run the Rivanna River Company and also am a resident of the Woolen Mills. And I hear my neighbors having hesitancy, about this project. And I think that I would say, I think overall the project of a bike and walk path that goes over the river there is a great concept. And it really just would represent Charlottesville really going in the right direction, I think, and catching up with a lot of other areas in terms of outdoor recreation resources. There's more and more people moving to this area, and they move here for a lot of them for outdoor recreation opportunities, and people visit this area for similar opportunities. And so we can't just put our head in the sand and think we can't build resources for them to use. So I think this is a really great project overall. I really hope that parking facility in Albemarle County that makes a trailhead, a well-known and trailhead that is on the county side in the State Farm vicinity would accompany it, because I think that's absolutely essential. Riverview Park is already a zoo. It's already a zoo. And so I think saying that a trailhead parking lot on the county side in the State Farm vicinity or Martha Jefferson vicinity, I would say is essential for this project, because it will attract use. It will absolutely attract use. So we have to provision that parking. And then the last comment, and I'll stop, is I hope that when we put the bridge abutment in wherever it goes, we consider putting river access in there as well, to get people to and from the river. That'd be my last comment.
Yeah, may I add something? Thank you. And I'm reminded of, you're my neighbor, Gabe, and I think that's great. I missed the first of this, and apparently the Broadway option got moved to junior varsity status. And it seems to me, and if other people in this group will agree with me, I think that needs to be addressed. I think the Broadway option is the least disruptive, certainly to the neighborhoods. It's got historic content to it. So I think maybe by our next meeting, I'd like to understand why it is that Broadway isn't the #1 choice.
Well, and we will talk about that, and I was hoping to get through that, and I think we can introduce it and plan to come back to that at the next meeting and maybe give you some time to think through some of this. But we might go a little bit over, but I know there are some folks that have a hard stop at 5, so I want to make sure that we, are wrapping up pretty close to that time. Bill, do you have a comment before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with all my neighbors, and I know they sound like they're not agreeing with each other, but as Tim has pointed out, this would be a transformational project for the city of Charlottesville. But as Will Mills neighbors, like Fran's been here for like 40 years, he's seen how oftentimes we jump first and then ask questions later, like when Rivanna Water and Sewer wanted to locate the gigantic pumping station in Riverview Park. I mean, there's some real questions about, well, what does it do to a park if you cover it with infrastructure? For instance, if you put that high bridge over Riverview Park. And so really I think Fran is calling the 2-span bridge the Broadway option, but I'm going to call it the 2-span bridge. Done well. I mean, I understand there's a tension because with smart scale, cost is everything. We just got to build cheap. But the Woolen Mills is still there after 100 years because it was built good. And I hope that we will begin to look at this as how can we improve this area? How can we improve the county's economic development area? How can we improve the Woolen Mills? How can we improve the wool factory by doing the best bridge possible? And the best bridge possible might be the 2-span bridge. I know it costs more. I know you got to talk to VMRC. There's in river, construction, but yeah, don't throw anything out yet. And let's get something that the community loves, not something that we happen to pull down some smart scale funds and then regret for the rest of our lives.
Sure. Thank you. Real briefly, there's
one more thing.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
About the network connection, 3 Chop, the pathway and Rivanna Turnpike crossed right where, you're basically proposing the 2-span bridge. And that's been a network connection for 300 or 400 years. So that's another, and you can put the parking in my backyard. I'm all for it. So, and park on the street. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, there's one other thing I want to talk about regarding the network connectivity, but a couple things that I'll introduce and we'll come back and talk about this more at our meeting in January in more detail. And that's looking at not just necessarily in the local area where the bridge would connect to the network at the landing site, but also what connections those facilitate throughout the greater Charlottesville area. I apologize, my dogs are playing in the background right now. So this kind of gives you a map of, it's very rudimentary, I realize, of what some of those network opportunities might be, not just in the very local site, but also in to the downtown area in Charlottesville where some of those connections are. So I may have misunderstood the conversations around Broadway. One of the things to consider with Broadway is that I know there's a lot of discussion about what a streetscape program might look like and that it's a nice wide road. But at this point, those improvements aren't in place yet. So there is a consideration about how much we want to rely on that as being the major connection, knowing that those improvements aren't necessarily in place. And as it is currently, that's probably not going to be a good way to facilitate movement from a bridge landing site to the greater Charlottesville downtown area. But this red line shows the Chesapeake connection. This blue line shows East Market Street. And obviously there's a whole road network, so you wouldn't necessarily have to go down those paths. But it just shows what those connections might look like. And then this is a connection to the shared use path and the Cole Tower Trail that goes by the railroad. So either Chesapeake Street or East Market Street could potentially have a good connection to that trail system. So any quick questions or comments on this, and we can discuss it more at our next meeting?
My only comment.
I got a quick one, Sandy, and something we talked about earlier is that just to keep in mind that any and all three and all four of these will probably be used by different users in different ways. And we do want to look at any immediate safety things that would want to be done. And then, which one do you try to make the gold star standard to attract people onto? But we're never going to be able to say, if you cross the bridge, thou shalt use option A to get to point B. But that said, I think we talked earlier, there may be some things on each corridor that could make things safer, more pleasant. But then again, maybe this committee would recommend something like, but make Broadway the gold star, if that's the will of the community, is something we can discuss on this one. So it's not, just to point out, we don't have to pick one and say the other two are never going to be used. Let's keep in mind, people will use all three of these in different ways, but one ought to be our recommendation.
I agree with that. And I just want to make one more observation. Broadway is almost all commercial. By my measurement, it's way wider than either Market Street or Chesapeake. And so probably somebody should take tapes out there. Broadway is a boulevard. And so anyway, I think we need to a little more time considering the value and the assets of Broadway. Thank you.
Sure, and just as far as Broadway, if I'm understanding correctly, that it would be the green line. I think the biggest challenge we would just need to be aware of going into that is that we probably wouldn't be able to make the connection directly from the bridge landing to the corridor at this point, but that could certainly be something that we could accommodate in the future.
On that
and
point,
the Woolen Mill site would better facilitate that in the future.
Sandy,
To connect to what? To connect
What's that?
to what connectivity? We're going from.
There would be some sort of connection that we would have to make, either off of East Market or through the Woolen Mills development to make that direct connection from the landing site to Broadway. That would probably need to be part of a future phase. But my point is that if that's a priority, the Woolen Mills, the southern landing site, would better accommodate that as being a future connection.
I think it needs to be studied. I just took a picture of it. It looks to me like the end of Broadway is the same connection as East Market. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Dick.
I walked that this morning. The main obstacle, Fran, is, as you know, is getting across the railway. Either you go under the railway to the parking area that's very small down by the wool factory, or you go up to Carlton, unless there is an exception to allow a pedestrian bike crossing at grade level with the railway where Shepherd Street used to be. And that's quite accessible. I've walked across it this morning. The thing is, you would have to have a safe crossing there that the railway would agree to for pedestrians and bikes. I think it could be done, but I have no idea of the bureaucratic obstacles. I do know that otherwise, going across that railway, the narrow tunnel on Franklin Street is really not suitable for pedestrians or bicycles. So you have to go up to the next street, which is Carlton. And I think otherwise you have to come up from the wool factory at the terminus down low and make your way up to the area of the parking lot where you're talking about, which I agree is very expansive up by the sewage treatment. But to get to that is the problem, because the railway. And I think if somebody on your staff could study the possibility of a pedestrian bike crossing of the railway at grade level where Shepherd Street used to be, that would solve some interesting problems. So obviously we can't complicate this proposal with that, because that would, according to Sandy, really create obstacles. We can't, but in our visioning, we can think about that, and some preliminary investigation of that as to its feasibility would, to my mind, be very useful for the longer term future.
I don't know if Brennan or any of the VDOT folks could weigh in just real quickly with the feasibility of an at-grade crossing over the railroad tracks.
I'll just say that that's been looked at in the last 5 years, and until that railroad goes away, that option is not viable.
I don't understand, Dick, I don't understand what you're saying. There's the Rivanna Trail. If you go across the new bridge, you turn right, you go back towards the city, you turn left, you go on the Rivanna Trail underneath the railroad bridge and right to the river where the crossing would be made to that island in the river. There's no railroad track there, and there's a wide trail that goes under the railroad bridge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I understand you, and I agree with that. This was, my comment applies if you landed near Chesapeake. And
Oh, I got you.
If you landed near Chesapeake and wanted to get to Broadway, that's the only way. So I agree with you that having the landing on the wool factory side, where you can take advantage of that tunnel, is a good idea. And you could walk from the big parking area above the wool factory, as it were, near the sewage, down to that terminus without crossing the railway. And I think that's also a very good idea. So Fran, I don't think I'm on a different place than you.
Hey, can I chime in? This is Chuck from VDOT. There is an at-grade crossing at the end of Broadway. It goes up and it makes a 90-degree turn and basically crosses the railroad at grade crossing, and then sort of turns a little bit to the west and comes down just west of Riverside Avenue, Market Street intersection. So
That's
that
Shepherd
is still
Street.
there.
That's closed, I think, by fence.
Yeah, it's closed and it is there. That's what I walked this morning. It used to be called Shepherd Street.
Okay, well, I mean, I just
Oh,
looked
Merchant
at it
Street.
on Google
Merchant
Earth
Street,
and
I
it
think.
still shows it as a at-grade crossing.
Yeah,
No,
it's not open.
Okay.
It's closed
Yeah,
right now, but we can talk about it. I have a quick one while the group's here, and this is probably up to Sandy. Because a lot of this, to my knowledge, we haven't really even talked about the bridge today. We've talked about a lot of other things. Have we done a straw poll, or should we do a straw poll just to see which option people are leaning on? I get the feeling it's the two bridge option. But have you done a poll yet? I missed the
How
last
come
meeting.
it's a two bridge option? Oh, you're right. It's two bridge option. That's right.
The end of Market Street option. I mean, do we know yet where most of the committee seems to favor the bridge? Is it not worth doing yet? Have we done
Are
it?
you, but for clarification, you're talking about the second, there's only two bridge locations, but getting to the bridge might be from Broadway as opposed to Market. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just talking about the bridge crossing the river. Have we done a poll of this committee to see option A or B yet?
Yeah, we haven't, Chris. So maybe there is one more thing that I want to make sure that we discuss today, and then why don't we plan to do that at the next meeting?
Perfect, that works.
Or I can maybe send out a poll option with the next meeting notification. That's a good idea. But there is one other thing I wanna cover, and hopefully we can get through it quickly.
Let's have the vote at a meeting so we can have conversation about it afterwards, please, if possible, rather than.
Well, we can do that regardless of how we have the vote. All right. So again, and I want to make sure it's clear that we are, I understand that some of these are going to be really critical concerns, and some of these are things that some of you will want to make sure that, or might be the primary deciding factor for what you are basing your preference on. So I don't want you to think that we're losing sight and feel like everything has been resolved as we move forward. It's just that we need to make sure that we are providing an opportunity to discuss a lot of different factors that should be considered. And so we need to keep the conversation moving forward, but I am certainly taking notes, and I am aware of your concerns as you communicate them to me. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. As part of the process of the policy board moving forward with pursuing this as a smart scale application, there's also a third alignment option. If you'll recall, there's a third red line on that thick line kind of rudimentary drawing that shows a third option of landing here at Riverside Avenue. So this was not part of the feasibility study, so it has not undergone any sort of technical review, and we don't have an engineered cost estimate on it at this point. But one of the questions we need to determine moving forward is whether or not this should continue to be part of our consideration, or whether or not we can move forward with pursuing the other two bridge options, knowing that if this option moves forward, it would likely not be able to be developed in time for this next round of smart scale applications. So this is a design that would basically go, it would land a little bit north on the Pantop side, but I wanted to show you more of a close-up of what it would look like on the Riverview Park side, because it does go through the park itself. And you can see these right here are where pier locations would be. And in addition to that, there are a number of other things that from a technical review perspective are seen as being things that would make us less likely to want to consider this. It ends mid-block. The terminus is mid-block versus at an intersection. This is a residential property, and this is owned by a resident. It's a residential property that's owned by a private citizen in the area. And then it's also across from other residential properties. So it would probably be the most disruptive to the community as a whole, as well as having some pretty significant impacts on the park. But because this was presented as a potential option to the policy board, I wanted to raise it with you to see what your desires were as far as considering this moving forward.
This is Chris. I brought this up to my director and assistant director and myself, and all three of us consider this a non-starter for park purposes.
Agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
All right, very good. That makes
Yep.
that makes our decision a little bit easier moving forward. So I think that's probably all the time we have to cover today. Let me stop sharing. I wanted to tentatively see, I don't know if you all have your calendars with you. Are you all available, to the best of your knowledge, on Thursday, January 20th at 4 p.m.? Or would you like me to send out a doodle poll? I'll get to you in a second, Peter.
That works for me.
Works for me.
Works for me. January 20th at 4.
January 20th at 4.
Let you know in 1 second. I'm pulling mine.
Okay.
Yes, that's fine for me.
All right. Peter, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you for public comments. And then if anybody has any sort of conflict, just feel free to put that in chat.
Thank you, Sandy. So group, you guys are doing awesome. You're doing exactly what you're here for, which is to bring in wisdom and perspective. And honestly, there's also going to be homework, and it's good to see Dick like having done it. Definitely visit the sites. That's so important. I posted 2 links in the chat. One is to a ArcGIS map that I made of the locations. If you guys wouldn't mind taking a look and letting me know if there's anything that's wrong about that, let me know. And similarly, I sent a Google Doc it's community owned. If there are comments or issues about each of those locations, let me know, and or just make them directly in the document. That way there's like a repository of everything that's in one place. So for example, you know, the option 2 activates the Broadway area maybe better than option 1 does. Option 1, you know, is closer to the playground, whatever, all those things. And then a question for you, is it official policy that option 3 is no longer an option, Sandy, or do we keep it on there? Should I leave it on the maps and stuff?
If you want to leave it on the map, I think we can officially say that it was not considered as being desired to move forward at this point by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee.
I'm gonna leave it there now, but if Sandy or the group sees that it's a problem having that ghost option 3 there, stay there, just let me know.
Okay.
Thank you.
One of the things I was hoping we could cover today, and you know, we'll just need to make sure that we do it next month, and I'll try to have some more options for you, is looking at what some additional public engagement might look around this. I think one of my thoughts might be, is now that we officially have 2 options that we're considering, is maybe doing some sort of survey that says, you know, which option do you prefer, this option or that option, and then maybe give a reason why, or ask people why they prefer that option or why they don't prefer the other option. So something like that. So that's something that you all can be thinking about, is what questions should we be asking the public more generally about this project? That would be helpful to know. And what are the potential ways that will be most effective in getting the input from the public that we need? So we'll talk about that more at our next meeting. And I know this went really fast. I know we have a lot to get through. I really appreciate y'all's time and commitment for this. And I hope that as we move this forward, you know, our goal is clearly to get a consensus, but if nothing else, I think we really will have some really helpful information to be able to give the policy board as far as what the community's desires and what the major consideration factors should be as we determine which of these alignments makes sense for the application. Are there any other comments either from the committee or from the public before we wrap up for the day?
I guess the things I'm thinking about, this is Kareem, that I don't know if we touched on, is the it's in the notes, the accessibility. I was looking at the parking for the 2-bridge option, the William Mills factory. You know, if we're making this accessible bridge, do we have an accessible pathway to the bridge from where people would park? And the other thing is kind of looking at this with a try to at least an equitable approach. You know, if it's a bridge for, you know, going to public free destinations, or are we going to private businesses? Who's going to use that bridge? Just things to keep in mind.
Sure. Thank you. Those are good points. So we can discuss that more either next meeting or a meeting after that, because it might take us a little bit longer to get through this list than I originally thought.
Sandy, I wonder if you could just remind me what the process here is and roughly the timing. You know, all the steps to actually submitting the proposal.
Yeah, I have a very, very rough sort of timeline that I can go ahead and share. Really what we're looking at is that the pre-applications for Smart Scale are going to need to be submitted in March. So those are kind of like rough at that point, but that's when we'll need to commit to which projects we're moving forward. So we probably need to have an alignment in place by then. As far as getting to that point, my goal is to continue these discussions with you all to get some public engagement. And then we will be asking you all to help us make sure that any recommendation or any considerations that need to be evaluated as choosing the bridge alignment gets forwarded to the policy board for their meeting in March for them to consider. There will be a big public engagement for all of our Smart Scale projects, probably in February, where we did this last round where we held a webinar for all of the projects in the area. So there will be that opportunity, but I think we might want to do something a little bit more specific for this project, specifically to hear some of the public feedback. Does that answer your question, or do you have any other more specific questions?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sandy, when is the actual application due? So that sort of has the pre-application as the end of the process. And of course, the ribbon cutting is the true end. But what about the application, the detailed application deadline?
Chuck, are those the beginning or the end of August?
August 1st is the deadline for application submission.
And also,
so we
just
would
so
have
you
to
know,
have everything done by then.
Just so you know, for transportation funding projects through Smart Scale, these are also programs 6 years out. So even if we're awarded funding, we're not looking at this project being implemented for probably at least another 4 to 6 years or so.
Based on the forecasting, funding wouldn't be available till 2025. So they wouldn't even start working on the project until then. So you're talking probably 2029, 2030 before you would be completed.
That's sobering.
Yep. Big lead time.
So it's not a short term. We're not going to jump on this right away. I mean, that's just the way the process works now for every project. Unfortunately, we've had recently we've had an influx of resources, so we're accelerating a lot of projects. But it depends on what the economy is doing at that time, whether we are going to still be able to do that. But what I was in a meeting last week and they told me was that for escalation purposes of the cost estimates, we're basically going to escalate them to 2025 for start of any work on the project.
Any other questions?
Sandy, last one more thing.
Yes.
Not to add more work to your pile, but if possible, could we take a look at how, even in just a simple diagram, how that connection to Broadway would happen? Because it's hard for me to imagine. And
Yeah,
that's-
maybe I need to get on the phone with with Fran and Chuck and look at what some possible options might be for that.
and I guess concurrent to that.
I'll send you my pictures again of underneath the railroad that gets you to where the bridge would be. And I think they start in the parking lot, and that may help. So if you can forward them on to Kareem.
Thank you.
I mean, the best way, in my opinion, would basically be to follow the road network around Woolen Mills to Broadway, where Broadway ends before it makes that 90-degree turn. Just follow the road, create a path next to the road that would get you up to Broadway. I mean, you could go parallel to the railroad tracks, but the grades are such that you're going really pretty much up a steep grade to get to, there's a Peoria or something road. Yeah, you could go that way and come in and go down, but the grades are pretty steep on that road. I wouldn't recommend that. I would go the other way because it's more of a gradual grade to get you around and up onto Broadway.
I do recommend everybody go down there and walk around, and then you can see what it's like.
Yeah, it's a mess if you go parallel to the railroad. It would be near impossible to do anything there.
Yeah, but
Sandy,
walk around, you'll see.
Yes.
We in the Woolen Mills will invite you to come down and we'll do a walking tour and show you how it's done. Okay?
We might open that up to the whole committee. I know other people have more familiarity. I live in Afton, just so you guys know, so I don't often go to Charlottesville to walk around. We rock in the cemetery by my house, but I would be happy to go there. I've been on the Pantop side, but I haven't been around the downtown area, so I need to do that regardless.
Oh my gosh, Fran, would you be willing to do that? Lead us on this tour?
Sure.
Okay, great. All right.
I'll send some potential dates out. We can have a field trip.
And I'll buy you coffee at the Wool Factory.
How lovely.
I'm probably not allowed to accept it, but I appreciate the gesture.
And the almond croissant at the
almond
Wool Factory is
croissants.
fantastic.
That sounds delightful.
Sandy, I just wanted to add to my Broadway comment earlier. It would be nice to see what kind of potential development is going to happen there, given this now that we found out this timeline is looking way far out into the future. What's on the table for Broadway for bike ped infrastructure, and what's kind of the general timeline?
Jessica, I'll leave it up to you, but if she's on, Jessica, I don't know if it'd be helpful to invite Kevin to the next meeting maybe, or just have some additional information to be able to speak to that.
Yeah, so there is something called the Broadway Blueprint Project, which is looking at what could be done in that area, multimodally speaking. However, there is no funding or plan for implementation for that project yet.
And I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think it's great that a Charlottesville planning commissioner is asking that question, because that's part of like the larger agenda here is getting city and county interface a lot more seamless. So, you know, what's happening on Carlton Avenue, Broadway, now this, it's all very really connected, and it's, you know, needs to be linked up really well.
All right. Well, we're only 22 minutes over. Anybody have any last final closing comments? Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you all again for sticking it out with us. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your investment into this process. So I will send out a meeting reminder for January 20th and maybe a poll to see when you all are available for an on-site visit. And otherwise, happy holidays, and I'll see you in the new year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandy.
Bye, everybody.